Chapter 10 – Premises and Equipment. In this chapter you'll discover good approaches to food premises design, the correct choice of equipment that minimises the threat of cross-contamination, and conclude with a brief look at how workflow within the food preparation area affects food safety. Let's go and find out Nick for more information.
You may have heard the term fit for purpose. What does that actually mean? Well, basically, your building must be fit for purpose. And from an environmental health officer's perspective, your premises have to be good enough for you to serve food safely to the general public, and as importantly, to protect your staff at the same time.
Number 1, essential services connected. All units need to have potable water supply. That's water that's safe to drink. For fixed location premises, this must be mains supplied. Premises also need to have an adequate provision for disposal of dirty water to the mains sewerage system. Now, if you're a mobile unit, maybe a takeaway unit, something like that, you can use one of the 25-gallon food-grade containers, which you would fill up from the mains water supply. Back to Nick, King of Gas.
Thank you for those few kind words there, Marcus. Point 2, I want to talk about is other services, gas and electric. Gas get from one of the main suppliers such as British Gas, E.ON. Electricity, again, it must be safe and use minimum UK domestic grade fittings, including earth protection, RCB residual current breakers, and also things such as isolators where appropriate. Make sure they are professionally installed. Get the experts in to do this. Make sure there's enough isolation switches, and again make sure that you've got adequate fire prevention systems as well. I'm now going to hand you over to Mr. Smooth to talk about working surfaces.
Number 3, working surfaces. After you, they are probably the thing that is going to come into contact most with food. So, they need to be smooth, cleanable, non-absorbent and non-toxic. It's important there are no gaps that can harbour bacteria, bits of food or pests. Kitchen grade stainless steel is strongly recommended. Now let's go over and zone in on Nick.
Point 4, segregated areas to prevent cross-contamination. This is probably the most important part of this chapter. Where possible, you need to segregate your business. It's actually called zoning. So if you think about it, you may have goods in, unpacking, you may then have preparation area where you're going to prep raw food, then you're going to cook it, and then the cooked food will be brought here either for assembly or straight out to storage. So you've got a distinct gap between raw and cooked food. You may also have the washing out of the way just over there as well. Now, it doesn't actually matter if you're a big kitchen or think about something like a small mobile outlet. Try to get this zoning idea into your head. What are you doing?
I'm just taking this.
Zones, go. Just can't get the staff.
Number 5, adequate lighting. Should be sufficiently bright and uniform to allow safe working when prepping food and using knives. It should be adequate to aid the identification of any threats to food safety, so things such as pests, items falling or placed on surfaces and floors. Lighting should also be screened to prevent any glass hazards in the event of a bulb smashing or exploding. Nick, where's the makeup lady gone?
Point 6, floors and walls. Ideally light in colour, smooth, cleanable, non-absorbent and non-toxic. Suitably hard wearing and resistant to water, grease, heat, chemicals and impact as well. Try to avoid gaps. For floors, commercial grade lino is ideal. Try and get it as well with the sealed and curving into the low wall idea rather than having a skirting board and a wall. It's easy to clean, it's also easy to spot any spillages. We don't recommend tiles, basically the fact of the grout. The grout it can easily hide bacteria. And talking about bacteria, I'm going to pass you back to the king of bacteria, Mr. Kilvington.
One of my pet hates is dirty grout. I hate it. Mouldy, dirty grout, horrible. Number 7, ceilings. Ideally light in colour and plain, so it's easy to spot any problems or areas where damp may be forming. Painted surfaces also need to be in good condition and not offering any physical hazards, such as maybe flaking paint, plasterboard, nails, anything else that can fall off. Also, no gaps that may harbour or allow any entry to pests. Now, if you're using a suspended ceiling, and lots of businesses do, the gap above must be accessible for inspection by any environmental health officer that might be looking for pests and contamination when they come and visit you. Now, they are okay, but again, not ideal because of the hazards that they can present with the movable tiles and any risk of a physical hazard falling into the food from them. They're also ideal home for pests. So, during your deep clean once a month, have someone look up there with a torch to check for pests. What are you doing? You've got a rolling pin, you're on a chair, which isn't safe, and you've got an ultraviolet light instead of a torch. Get yourself down.
Point 8, ventilation. Ventilation, or actually lack of ventilation, is the biggest complaint within the food service industry. If your staff are too hot, too sweaty, there's not enough ventilation, it makes for a very poor environment and people tend to move on very quickly. Make sure your ventilation is fit for purpose, i.e. it's big enough for the size of the task. If you're doing a couple of toasters a day or paninis a day, you only need a small extraction unit. If you're doing 200 or 300 covers a day, then you need a proper piece of kit like this. Make sure it's fit for purpose and for your business. Marcus, spark up the Quattro.
Let's do it, Nick. Number 9, windows and doors. Now, need to be in good condition and maintained to prevent any access to pests, so right down to the floor or harbouring any dirt. Windows, for example, need to be capable of ventilation but completely screened to prevent any access to pests and flies and flying insects. Make sure you keep the mesh in good order and cleaned during your monthly deep clean. Fire doors should be securely fitted to stop any fires, also self-closing. These will also prevent any access to pests to your building and to your kitchen. Talking of pests, let's just let one in. In you come.
Oh, hello Marcus. Well, thank you very much. Okay, while I'm here, point 10, which is adequate pest access prevention measures. That's quite a mouthful. We're talking about pests in another chapter, in a separate chapter. However, it's worth mentioning it as it's actually linked to the design and maintenance of your premises. You, by law, have to make all reasonable efforts to prevent pests and also pets accessing the food area. If they do get inside, you need to provide things such as an insecticutor, potentially bait boxes as well, rat poisons such as that. Don't do it yourself, get a professional company to do it for you. And the final thing on that is don't use something such as a fly spray, especially over open food areas. Now actually, if you want a mobile unit, similar type of principles apply. Speak to your local EHO if you think you need a little bit more guidance. And like I said, we're finishing pests off now, so I'm going to hand over to Marcus and talk about food storage.
Number 11, food storage. Now, you need to have adequate food storage to be available for any ingredients or part processed or completed products. Now, the layout and size of storage is going to vary and depend on the size of your food business. Things to be aware of: dry storage needs to be cool or cooled, a little bit like this, sealed away from pests. So we've got doors on this, and you can see the products are stored on shelves above the floor as well to keep pests out. Also needs to have appropriate ventilation. It needs to be well lit and have suitable surfaces, so we've got stainless steel on this. Provision must be made for appropriate separation of ingredients and foodstuffs, paying particular attention to any allergens. And talking of allergens, back to Nick.
Point 12 now, we're nearly getting to the end, aren't we? Staff changing areas. Changing facilities should provide the storage of outdoor clothing and footwear so they're separated from the food areas. Staff should change out of the uniform also to use the toilet if they go on the break. Now, can I pass you over to point 13, which is toilets, Marcus?
Of course you can. So point 13, toilets from me, toilets and washing facilities. Now, it's a legal requirement to have hand washing facilities with hot and cold running water. Also, you need to have adequate facilities with food prep and generally washing up. All fixed location units should provide separate customer and staff toilets. In an ideal world, they need to be separated by 2 doors from food service and prep areas. Also bear in mind that hand washing facilities need to have soap and hand drying, which ideally is via paper towels, isn't it, Nick?
It is indeed.
So that's the 13 things that we've gone through that an environmental health officer is going to look at when they come and audit your business. That's it from me and Nick now. We're just going to what?
It's time for fairy cake, isn't it? At least one.
Fairy cake and a cup of tea.
I tell you what, food safety, it's got a lot better nowadays, hasn't it?
It has got a lot better, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Crikey, do you remember the bad old days? God, some of the stories we could tell. Sure, they're having a laugh these days, aren't they? We've pulled some stunts when it comes to premises. These days, you got to provide good, safe waste disposal areas. Back in my day, we used to throw it in the canal. These days, you got to provide facilities for personal hygiene. Toilets, hand washing, soap. We had no soap back in my day. These days, you got to provide a pest-proof building and implement pest control schedule. We just used to get out the shovel. Mickey, bless his cotton socks, used to whack 'em with the shovel. These days, you got to provide chilling equipment, preferably right from direct sunlight. We just used to put it out the back. These days, you got to have enough ambient chilled frozen storage to cope with peak demand. We just used to leave it in the back of the van. These days, you got to have a constant supply of fresh mains water. This is called potable water. And you've got to have adequate drainage capable of removing food waste and food debris. We just used to use the canal for both of them. And you've got to have these days adequate ventilation and temperature control. We just used to prop the back door open with a fire extinguisher. Cool. Hope they don't drain the canal one of these days. Laters, potatoes. I'm going to talk to you about workflow. Now, workflow is all about food safety. That's ultimately what it's about. And it's the name given to best describe complete consideration of all stages of food production in your business, from goods in through to service and delivery. Good premises design is about the efficient use of your premises to enable a continuous workflow through that production process, and this is all about food safety. So you as a supervisor, I would suggest every once in a while it's a good idea to take a step back, look at your workflow. The objective is to get it to flow in one direction. Does that happen for you? Or perhaps you could do it in a more efficient way. Whether it's a small mobile unit or a large production area, you want goods in straight to storage, prep and raw to lead to cooking, to then assembly, plating up, and finally onto either storage, service, or holding as appropriate. The idea is to get them moving in one direction with minimal or no staff crossing or retracing the steps, which is crucial in cross-contamination avoidance. When I'm talking about workflow in terms of zones, the first zone will be goods in, second zone will be storage, third will be food prep, and the fourth will be cooking. Fifth will be assembly of the dish, and sixth may be the service area where the waiters or waitresses actually take it out to the customers. The objective is a good workflow designer to process the food in the most efficient manner possible, and that's all about food safety. To remove any bottlenecks in the processes, speeding up production throughout. To reduce or eliminate any crossing or recrossing of zones, so to prevent cross-contamination. And also reduce the amount of time that food spends in the danger zone. And the last point from me on workflow is to minimise the number of times that food is handled. That's it for workflow.